And the first question is in the name of Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On whose authority did his Chief of Staff request that the Parliamentary Service provide access to information relating to ministers and their officers and, quote, any other relevant material requested, end quote? And did this take place after the Henry inquiry was told that Parliamentary Service would not release the information requested?
Who's going?
Anyone? Anyone?
Order. Order. And before I call the Minister, my officers have been advised that this answer may be longer than normal. Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, first can I congratulate Mr Robertson on his dancing last evening, which I thought was very good.
Order. Would the Minister please just address the question?
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, my Chief of Staff was acting with my authority when he asked Parliamentary Service to supply information relating to ministers and their staff to the Henry inquiry. The member will be aware that the publicly released terms of reference for the inquiry clearly stated that Stage 1 would include reviewing communications and copying equipment and records, logbooks and any other material considered relevant of the persons and or their officers who had or were likely to have had access to the compliance review report. At no point was it expected or desired that a journalist's records would also be included in the inquiry. It is wrong that they were, and I am extremely disappointed that the journalist's records were sent to the inquiry. Let's be clear about what happened here. Parliamentary Service sent records that were not asked for to the inquiry, and that's a serious mistake. My Chief of Staff asked Parliamentary Service to release information relating to ministers and staff only, not a journalist. He did so because he was giving consent to release the information for government ministers as flagged in the terms of reference. I'd also made it clear myself that I expected ministers to comply. And I note, Mr Speaker, that these issues are now before the Privileges Committee.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
It was a very long answer from Mr Joyce acting for the Prime Minister, but it didn't respond to the second leg of the primary question.
I think on this occasion that's a reasonable point that's being made. Can the Minister, on behalf of the Prime Minister, respond to the second part? Did this take place after the Henry inquiry was told by Parliamentary Service not to release the information requested? Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, my advice is that Mr Eagleson emailed Mr Thorne on the 9th of May, and of course that email was tabled in the House yesterday, to confirm that the Prime Minister wished them to make available to the inquiry records in relation to ministers and their staff, and that's the instruction he's referring to in the primary answer.
So, point of order, Grant Robertson.
I'm sorry, that still does not answer the second leg of the question. The second leg of the question asks if that took place after the Henry inquiry was told that Parliamentary Service would not release the information. All Mr Joyce did then in his further answer was tell us something we already knew about an email from the 9th of May.
It would be helpful if the Minister, on behalf of the Prime Minister, could address that particular fact. It is a primary question that was on notice.
No, I understand, Mr Speaker. My understanding is that this email occurred at the point where it was felt that Mr Eagleson would need to clarify that the Prime Minister and Mr Eagleson as his Chief of Staff had given permission for ministers to be accessed, and that was the case. So I think we can assume that might have occurred after originally being told that that they needed that clarification, so it'd be available.
Supplementary question. Grant Robertson.
So to completely clarify, the Henry inquiry was told by Parliamentary Services that they would not release the electronic information, and they only did release that information after Wayne Eagleson sent an email on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Right, the Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Well, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I'm not sure that I could be as emphatic as the member would like me to be, but I think certainly we can take from the email... Notice.
Order. Order.
We can take from the email that the Chief of Staff felt that he needed to clarify for Parliamentary Services that it was indeed a requirement, that there was indeed a request to make available on behalf of ministers.
Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Did the Henry inquiry request and receive swipe card data for Andrea Vance in her movements in and out of this building after Wayne Eagleson's email on the Prime Minister's behalf requesting any other material be provided by Parliamentary Services to the Henry inquiry?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I don't have that chronology to hand, but what is clear, now what's very convenient is your question, Mr Robertson. What is clear is that Mr Eagleson in no way asked for that information, so whether it was supplied before or after is entirely incidental to Mr Eagleson's email.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
When he said in answers to my written questions that his office became aware of the existence of emails between Andrea Vance and Peter Dunn discussing the Kitteridge report, quote, as a result of a conversation with the Parliamentary Service, why was his office communicating directly with the Parliamentary Service about records retrieved for the Henry inquiry?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I think it's fairly straightforward. Mr Eagleson had told the Parliamentary Service that they were entitled to provide the information in regards to ministers. As we all know, there was some concern expressed, I think from Mr Dunn from his office about that information being supplied, and so therefore there was further conversation, again I suspect, wanting to know whether that information could be supplied, and subsequently there was obviously a conversation with Mr Dunn. But this is all in relation to the minister's information, and it was at the point where minister's information was not able to be supplied that clarification was sought.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is he aware of Section 6.2 of the Parliamentary Service Act 2000 that states, quote, the Parliamentary Service is not an instrument of the executive government, and if so, why did his Chief of Staff, on his direction, instruct the Parliamentary Service to provide, quote, any other relevant material requested by the Henry inquiry to the inquiry?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, because it was in relation to ministers that had a ministerial warrant provided, that the Prime Minister had provided them, and the Minister had made it clear to all his ministers that he expected them to comply with the inquiry and supply and authorise the supply of the relevant information, and Mr Eagleson was following up that instruction with the Parliamentary Service. It does wash, and you should pay attention.
Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Why does he think it is appropriate for his Chief of Staff to put pressure on the Parliamentary Service to release electronic records which they had originally declined to release to the Henry inquiry?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, 2 points on behalf of the Prime Minister in response to that. Firstly, the first point is that actually it was in regard to ministers who held a ministerial warrant, and they hold that because they enjoy the confidence of the Prime Minister, and he had made it clear that that information needed to be provided to the inquiry. The second point is the contradiction where just a short time ago in this House the opposition were baying for those emails to be released between Mr Dunn and Ms Vance. And now suddenly they're holier-than-thou about the privacy of that information. You can't have it both ways, Mr Robertson.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is it correct that Peter Dunn received the Kitteridge report as the leader of a support party, as an MP in this House, not as a minister, as the minister's just stated?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I aren't aware exactly how, on what basis he received that report, but what I can tell you, in relation to the emails and the information, it was in relation to his matter as a ministerial warrant.
No, it wasn't. Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Given that this is his inquiry and that it was on his instruction that his Chief of Staff asked Parliamentary Service to access the electronic and phone records, and that when his Chief of Staff speaks to someone, they're speaking to him, why won't he just take some responsibility for a fundamental breach of the rights of MPs and journalists in this building?
Mr.
Honourable
Speaker,
Stephen Joyce.
on behalf of the Prime Minister was making inquiries about his ministers in the ministerial inquiry. It was not about their capacity as MPs. It was not about journalists. And with the greatest respect, the irony of a situation where the opposition has been baying for this information and is not happy for it to now be released.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on several occasions now, the Minister has gone well beyond what have been pretty serious questions to him and started to attack the opposition. This is in every answer that he has delivered, he's attacked the opposition. Now, previously in this House, we actually had a standard that suggested that ministers didn't do that.
Point of order.
Speaking to the point of order, Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, in relation to that last question, it contained any number of suppositions and made a political accusation, and I think I was entitled to make a political response.
Order. Order. I don't need any further assistance. I, on this occasion, think the answer to the question was given was adequate and certainly not out of order in any way. So, point of order, Grant Robertson.
Speaker, I seek leave of the House to table an email from Wayne Eagleson on 9th of May this year at 4:39 p.m. to Jeff Thorne, in which he confirms that the Prime Minister would like Parliamentary Service to make available inquiry team records and other relevant material requested.
Leave is sought to table that email. Is there any objection to that course of action? There is none. No. I apologise. There was objection. It will not be tabled.
Objective.
That's right. Yes. Order. Order. As every member's right in this House. Question number 2, Maggie Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance.